I want to welcome you back to our Leadership in the New Testament series, and now we're on session 5. But session 5 is part of a smaller component, and that's on the communication sensation. In our last session, we talked about sensational communication is patient communication. You know, James told us, the brother of Jesus, that the kind of communication that God is looking for starts with listening. So we're quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger. In this session, we're going to look at communication from a different angle. We all know that communication can be difficult. One of the foremost fears that people always note in the list of fears is the fear of public speaking. There's a famous story about a guy named Cyrano de Bergerac. Now, Cyrano de Bergerac actually did live. He lived from 1619 to 1655. And he was famous for his style of writing. So he kind of became a name that was associated with really being able to articulate your thoughts and your feelings. Well, several centuries later, in fact, in the year 1897, there was a playwright in France named Edmond Rostand, and he actually produced a play called Cyrano de Bergerac. Now, the play is fictional. But the story is centered around a guy named Christian de Nevalet who is in love with the fair Roxanne. And for this guy, Christian de Nevalet, he scores high in the handsome department, but he's tongue-tied. Poor Cyrano in the play is the opposite. He has beautiful articulation of his thoughts, but not scoring so high in the looks department. So she is in love with Christian, but he can't express himself. So when she comes out on the balcony and he's talking to her with these lofty words, they're actually not his words. Cyrano de Bergerac is in the shadows telling him what to say. This play became so famous. It's been published in multiple languages, hundreds of renditions. In fact, a movie edition won an Oscar. I think I know why. Even though the story is fictional, the situation isn't. Have you ever been in a situation where you wished you could have thought of the right thing to say? Sometimes it's even after, hours after, days after, we think, oh, why did I say that? Or, why didn't I say that? I think someone could go become incredibly rich if they could come up with a pocket Cyrano de Bergerac that could just tell you what to say in a moment. But see, the truth is that people actually relate well with the fact that sometimes we're not sure how to perfectly articulate something. That in reality, the kind of communication that is incredibly effective isn't communication that's always perfectly done, it's communication that is humbly done. So the second component of the communication sensation is humble communication. The first component is patient communication. The second one is humble communication. Listen to how the Apostle Paul describes this in Colossians chapter 4. He says in verse 4, "Pray that I may proclaim," and he's talking about the message of Christ, "proclaim it clearly as I should. Be wise in the way that you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversations always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." Now, I don't know of a communicator in the New Testament, other than Jesus, who was more gifted than Paul. But notice one of Paul's prayers. He asked the people, please pray for me that I'll communicate as I should. And then he encourages his followers, including us, Jesus' followers, to do what? Make sure your communication is seasoned with grace. So humble communication is a key to effective communication. Humble communication builds relationship. We're not just trying to say something, we're trying to build something, and what we're trying to build is relationships. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the most common fears is the fear of public speaking. Well, it's not just the fear of public speaking that gets people. Have you ever been mugged by fear in a private conversation? You see someone coming your way and you can't think of what to say. You're going into an interview and you're so worried that you're gonna blow it. Sometimes we'll come away from a situation and think, oh, I know I just blew that conversation. When I first met my wife in November of 1980, I was in the library. My wife to-be walked in. I hadn't met her yet. She walked in and she took my breath away. And I looked at her and out loud, who knows why, I went, whoa. Well, when I did that, she looked at me. And now I got to do something. A friend was sitting with me and out loud he said, well, go meet her. And so now I have to go talk to her. So I walked over the table where she was seated. I sat down and I started a conversation and I started talking about fast cars. I don't know why. Later on, after I walked away, I just thought that was not smart. Why did I do that? But I was nervous. I was mugged by fear. Okay, here's another example of that. Have you ever gone name dead? You see someone coming at you, like you go to a youth rally or you go to a Christian camp or some event, and you see someone coming toward you and you realize you're supposed to know their name. So they're like, hey, and you're like, no. And they come up and they start talking to you and you're like, oh, what is their name? What is your name? Maybe you've even tried to be sneaky about it and sent one of your friends and said, I'm supposed to know that girl. I'm supposed to know that guy. Go find out their name and come back and tell me. I did that with a friend of mine one time. I asked him to go get a guy's name. He came back and said, hey man, his name is John. I got it. So I walked up and said, John, it is so good to see you again. And the guy said, it's good to see you too, Don, but my name is Robert. And I look over and my friend is laughing and I thought, oh, I can't believe you did that. But if you've ever gone name dead, you know what it feels like to be mugged by fear, just the fear of conversation. So one of the things we got to think about is, how do we overcome that? Through humble communication. Now let's take this to a little bit more serious level. I want you to think about the last argument you had with your family, with friends, with a teacher. I want you to think about that argument. Maybe it was by text, maybe it was by a Facebook post, email, conversation, a telephone conversation, or face-to-face. How did it go? Would you characterize it as a humble conversation? Would they characterize it as a humble conversation? You see, when humility is lacking, conversations go poorly. When humility is present, they can be sensational. I want to give you 2 keys to sensational conversation. I want you to write these 2 keys down because people that are great communicators follow these 2 rules. So let me give them to you. Number 1, strong, humble communicators do not take understanding for granted. Now they know we're speaking the same language, whether it's English, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, whatever it is. We're speaking the same language, but words don't always mean the same thing to everybody. So sometimes you can say something, it makes total sense to you, but the other person took it differently than you intended. We sometimes say, well, you took it the wrong way. Well, see, humble communicators understand that in every conversation, whether it's one-on-one or with a crowd, there's someone sending the communication and there's someone receiving the communication. And see, great communicators are humble enough to understand that if I say it the way I meant it, but they don't receive it the way I meant it, then I need to take responsibility and do some more work. I need to not take communication for granted, to take understanding for granted. Let me give you an illustration. If I said to you, oh, I'm so sorry I was late. Good grief, I got stuck behind a line of cars. What would you be thinking? Well, you might think, oh, well, there was a traffic jam. What if I said, oh, no, it was a train. I got stuck at a train track. It was a long train of cars. And you're like, why didn't you say it was a train? Good point. Well, don't we call train cars cars? You say, but not like that. We don't normally use that phrase that way. Exactly. But that's a simple example of how you can use a correct word, but still have misunderstanding. So one of the keys of humble communicators is they don't take understanding for granted. A second key is great communicators use multi-sensual communication. Now what I mean by that is they appeal to the senses, touch, sound, sight. So great communicators don't just depend on their words. Let me give you another simple illustration. What if you were in a theater lobby, you're going to the opening of some huge new blockbuster movie, and there's so much noise in the lobby that it's hard to hear. You stand at the concession counter and they ask you, what would you like? And you could say, I want 2 bags of popcorn. And they say, what? What if you went like this? I want 2 bags of popcorn. Well, see, just by holding up 2 fingers, you've now engaged the sense of hearing and the sense of sight, making it clearer. Sometimes when people have a confrontation with each other, this multisensual communication can also help. For instance, if 2 people, it's kind of heated tempers, and so what if one of them says to the other, hey, you know what? Could we sit down and talk this out? Just the change in posture can make a conversation more relaxed. So see, if you're using more senses for communication, it can be more effective. So great communicators are humble enough to recognize that we don't take understanding for granted, and we do more than what's normally expected to get our message clearly articulated. Now, the other thing I want to look at real quickly is some myths of communication. See, one of the problems that a lot of people think is that humble or kind of common communication won't be effective. The way that they think about it is, no, you got to really make it, kind of sexy, celebrity, or scary. Now, what I mean by that is, by sexy, I mean, that it's got to kind of be provocative conversation, the way that the appearance comes across. Well, that could be partially true. Some people think, well, if I was just more important, if we could get a celebrity to articulate our message, then more people would listen. And sometimes that's true. Or if you put the fear of God into them, if you scare people and guilt them into something, then it'll probably be more effective. Well, I want to challenge that. I actually have done a ton of research on this. In fact, for these 3 lessons, I read more than 600 articles about communication. One of the articles I came across is done by this magazine called Advertising Age. And they ranked the top 100 most memorable and effective ad campaigns of the last century. The top 100. Now listen to what one of the guys who was involved in this, William Birnbach, he said this: we want to spawn a creative revolution to show that good taste, good art, and good writing can be good selling or good marketing. When they reviewed the top 100 most memorable and effective ad campaigns of the last century, listen to these statistics. Only 8 of those 100 used a celebrity. Only 7 of those top 100 had a sexual theme. And only 4 used fear. Now let me review that again. These are the top 100 best ad campaigns, best communication. And what are the stats? Only 8 used a celebrity, only 7 had a sexual theme, and only 4 had a fear theme. So the idea that in order to be kind of an effective communicator, it has to be sexy or celebrity or scary is not true. Now those things do affect advertising, but they are not required for great communication. Now let me give you another angle through which to look at this. I researched the top paid actors who do commercials. So these are just actors and actresses that do commercials. So you've probably seen the Progressive Insurance commercial with the famous lady Flo. Her name is Stephanie Courtney, and Flo, the lady with whom we have something in common, yeah, she makes $1 million a year. The lady Diane Amos, who's the Pine Sol cleaning lady, makes $2.5 million a year. Peter Marcarelli, who is the Verizon test man who became famous by saying, "Can you hear me now?" Makes $10 million. And Jared Fogle, who's this guy who lost weight eating sub sandwiches from Subway restaurants, yeah, he gets paid $15 million. Now think about it. Flo, the Pine Sol lady, the Verizon test guy, and the Subway sandwich eater. What are these people? They're common. They feel like the customer. They are humble communication, and they're getting paid a ton of money for it. What they all have in common is that they're relatable and they're humble. So if we were to take that research and look at it from the viewpoint of being God's leaders, of being people who are Christ-centered, connected, community impacting, being people who are focused on being the kind of leaders that spur kingdom growth and serving of others, how would that play out for us? Well, what I want you to do is that I want you to look with me at some words. The first word is one I've made up, and it's on this paper, true in ad. Now, what do you think I mean by this? This is truth in advertising. Someone that has integrity is going to work hard at making sure that the way they appear is how they really are. So I'm going to give you 4 steps in that for humble communication. Number 1, our deed matches our creed. Let's make sure that if we make a promise, we're going to do our best to deliver. And if we don't deliver, we're going to be honest about it. That's deed and creed. Number 2, humble communication demonstrates itself in a word I've made up, sipability. You think, what? What I mean by this is you don't have to try to get someone to gulp down your message. Give it to them in how much they can handle, not how much you can deliver. Sometimes salespeople oversell their product. Sometimes a speaker will oversell their point. I've done it. I know what this feels like. You may have done it as well. Sipability means I'm not going to try to say as much as I can say. I'm going to say as much as they can hear and understand. Number 3, and we've mentioned this already, 30 seconds of clarity. Humble communication means that I'm not just fixated on what I already think. I want to make sure that I'm gaining understanding from my audience or from the other person. 30 seconds of clarity means patient communication, but it also means humble communication. It's more important for me to gain clarity than to make my point. And then finally, open communication. I want to challenge you to drop something from your vocabulary. We will often hear people say something like this, well, now to be honest, or I'm going to be honest. Well, to be honest, but see what that can convey to someone is that sometimes you're honest and sometimes you're not. You say, well, that's not what I meant. I know, that's why we want to drop it from communication. What would be better to say is now to be open. Now to be more open. Because people understand that. People understand that sometimes you have something truthful to say, but you're unsure about saying it. So it's not that you're about to tell the truth, it's about that you're about to be open with the truth. Now, you say, well, what about Jesus? Sometimes Jesus said, verily, verily, I say unto you, or now I tell you the truth. Well, if you were to look at those words in the original language, the original words are pronounced in Greek, amen, amen. And what that literally means is, let it be so, or let me give you this, and this is very important. Jesus is saying, if you corroborate what I'm saying with the truth, you'll discover that they match. Jesus isn't saying, I'm now telling the truth and in the past I wasn't telling the truth. That's just kind of how it could come across in English. What Jesus is saying is what I'm saying will be proven to be true no matter how many times it's tested. So another way for Jesus to say that would be to now to open up the truth. Now, another thing I want you to consider would be this. Sometimes the reason that we're not humble in our communication is because we become competitive in our communication. We want to win an argument. There's a big difference between making a point and winning an argument. Sometimes we'll get so competitive in a conversation, we quit caring about the point. And we quit caring about listening. So let me give you some suggestions on how to keep your conversation humble and clear and open. First, ask yourself, I wonder how what I've said impacted the others in the room. Maybe I should even ask them, how is what I'm saying impacting you? Now, you can also, if you're leading a team meeting, you could also ask that of someone in the meeting, especially if they're dominating the meeting. If there's another person dominating the meeting, you might look at them and say, hey, Sherry, or hey, Jerry, I wonder how what you're saying is impacting everyone else. So let's go around the room and ask that. So this can help with clarity, but it also brings humility to the conversation because it opens it up. What do you do when tempers fly in a conversation? So sometimes you have somebody that's dominating a conversation, and I just gave you a way to kind of open that up a little bit. But what do you do if tempers have started rising in a conversation? Maybe people have said some mean and hurtful things. Maybe someone's cut someone off or interrupted someone. Well, here's a couple of things that we can do. First of all, if you're the person whose temper is out of control, if that's you, then the first thing you could do is just stop and say, I'm not as ready as I thought I was for this conversation, and I'm sorry. I need some time to collect my feelings and come back to this conversation. I'll say it again. If you're the one that's struggling with your temper, you're a little bit out of control, whether it's with a parent, a sibling, a friend, a teammate, to just say, hey, time out. I just realized I'm not as ready for this conversation as I thought I was, and I'm sorry. I need a little bit of time to collect myself, and then I'll come back to the conversation. Is that okay? See, that's a humble way to move. Now, if it's the other person who has lost their temper, maybe what you can do is say something like, could we sit down? That's that multisensory. Could we sit down together? Or you might say, you know what? I'm not sure either one of us is as ready for this conversation as we thought we were. Could we take a breather and come back to it? Now, you're not accusing them of not being ready. You're suggesting it kind of feels like we're not ready. Okay? So those are a couple of practical examples. Now, I mentioned earlier in this series a book called Good to Great by author Jim Collins, who's one of the top business consultants in the world right now. He ranks leaders from level 1 to level 5. 5 is the top, the absolute rarest form of leader. And you know what he said separates level 5 from level 4? Now, level 4, these are top leaders that are running most businesses. But level 5 are just leaders in the stratosphere. Do you know what Jim Collins said when he did his research? Separated the top leaders from the absolute rarest, greatest leaders? Humility. It was humility. Think about that. You are so at the top of your game that you're on a mountaintop that other leaders don't even know exists. And rather than being prideful, what's the leading characteristic? Humility. When we demonstrate humility, we build relationships. So what I want us to think about is this. Humble communication doesn't take understanding for granted. Humble communication uses all those sensory tools we can use to communicate. Humble communication is looking for truth in advertising, and that means not sexy or celebrity or scary, but humble and connecting communication. And when that communication is being dominated by someone, rather than trying to become competitive and win over them, we try to help the conversation become more humble by suggesting others be involved. If we lose our temper, we confess it, ask for forgiveness, and ask for a little time to connect ourselves. If somebody else loses their temper, we invite them to a posture of more humility. We admit that maybe neither one of us were as ready as we thought we were, but all of this is based in humility. And Jim Collins says that's what separates the good from the great. Thanks for joining us for Session 5. We'll see you next time.